to Mi Escuela es Su Escuela, My School is Your School, connecting Montgomery College with the community. I am Gloria Bonilla. Today, my guests are Connie Hutzman. She is an attorney, a training director for the DC Stop Modern Slavery, and Greg Bristow, retired FBI special agent, and also who specializes in human rights investigations. Welcome both to the program. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Let me ask you something, Greg. Is human trafficking something new?
No, it's not. Human trafficking is modern day slavery, and it affects about 30 million people around the country. Here in the US, we abolished slavery in 1865, followed by a Civil Rights Act in 1866 and the 14th Amendment in 1868. But 150 years later, we're still finding slavery all across the country, affecting children and women, immigrants and citizens, and children and adults.
And really, there's two types of human trafficking that the federal government has recognized, and that's labor trafficking and sex trafficking. And sex trafficking is really forced prostitution. And prostitution has been around since the beginning of time. And so, but the distinction between the prostitution and the human trafficking is when they force these girls into doing it. People think that these girls are out on the streets, that they're willingly doing this. They're making money. And the fact is they really aren't. They're being tortured into doing this. I heard of a case where the trafficker, their pimp, the pimp is actually a trafficker. He's a criminal. He put a pair of scissors through the girl's hands because she refused to do this. So the means that they're using to get these victims to be on the streets, to be into prostitution for them. So it's been around since the beginning.
It is good to know. And the question may be kind of, why is this? But many people may not know. And they see human trafficking as something that is a brand new thing happening. It's a new concern, but indeed, it is something like what you said, Greg, is something that's been there forever. We thought that we have eradicated this, and it's happening someplace else. But what you said too, is happening here in the United States. What in the United States, is it closer to us? What parts, is this mainly found in certain states, places? Is rural?
The U.S. Department of Justice has researched these human trafficking cases, and they're finding human trafficking in every state of the United States, and it involves young people and old people. Traffickers are professional manipulators, and they look for weak people or people having financial difficulties, and they use these people to make money off them, whether it's a migrant worker in an apple field, a restaurant that has an all-you-can-eat buffet, or a garment industry in New York City. These people want to work people to get as much money they can out of them.
And I think I'm glad you brought these posters with us for us today, because I think it's many times the faces, I think it's very important to put a face into what is happening. And like you said, you know, the restaurants, we go to restaurants, we pay for food, but we don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Especially all these all-you-can-eat places. You think, oh wow, I'm really getting a bargain, I'm paying so little. But what you're realizing is they're not paying their workers. And I think what people don't really realize, I heard this one statistic, but that 100 to 300,000 American children, those are American children, are being trafficked here in the United States. And I always thought, well, that's a high statistic. But now that I've been looking into it more and doing more research, I'm finding out, I really think that that statistic is way too low. So, and looking at where these people are coming from, where these victims are coming from, they're pulling them from runaways, they're pulling them from foster care. And so it really is an American problem. It's happening in every state in the United States. And the East Coast, certainly the East Coast, it's very prominent, running the trafficking victims all up and down the East Coast.
And do you think that's also in terms of, you know, where is heavy, you find the more cases in the East Coast? Could it be because there is the population density, or is because it's easier to move people around? Do you think it's the...
Well, I think the East Coast with the I-95 corridor that goes all the way from New York to Florida is an easy way to move people. Traffickers move sex trafficking victims probably every 3 or 4 weeks. they're on a circuit. They don't want the victims to know what state they're in, and they take advantages. Now in Florida, with all the fruit growing and vegetables, they'll probably have more farm labor victims than sex trafficking. Same thing with Hawaii or Washington State, which has a lot of fruit. So each region of the United States has its own particular trafficking issue.
Victims.
Like the picture you have here is a young boy working in the fields.
So the victims are there, and had to be obviously individuals who are in very precarious circumstances because, you know, they either are coming crossing the border or brought from outside. Somebody paid somebody. It's a big business, isn't it?
Well, they're saying that like 60%, the FBI has done studies, and 60% of the girls' sex trafficking victims that they had talked to came out of the foster care system or actually had some sort of contact with the foster care system.
Wow.
And that in one city alone, 82% they found had run away. There's a survivor of human trafficking that we work with at DC Stop Modern Slavery, Barbara Amaya. She was sold on the streets at the age of 13 years old, but she ran away from home in DC when she was 12. This couple befriended her on the streets of DC, and she thought, oh, I'm finally going to get some help.
Yes.
And so they brought her in for the night. She's really thinking, oh, finally. And then the next day, she was sold to a trafficker. He was a man, huge man in his 30s. We have his mugshot of when he was in prison, and it's really horrible. And he bought her, on the streets of DC. She saw the money being paid to him for her on the streets. She was put in a wig so that nobody would see how old she was. And then he took her up to New York. So this is when she was 12, she was sold to them. He put her on the streets to prostitute herself out on the street. And when she was 13 years old, he was beating her with coat hangers. She was on the streets of New York City. He was beating her on the street. She was being drugged by her hair into a taxi, and nobody helped her. So here it is. It's American. It's happening to our American girls. It's not something she chose to do. She was a victim in these circumstances, and it was very easy for him to come down to DC, buy her, and then take her up to New York City.
Transportation is easy, no? So they have to have a way to move very quickly within the different avenues, the different ways to move from up and down the East Coast.
And I couldn't imagine, you think you're being helped and then you're turned on the street. And also they're looking for people that are under these circumstances. They're looking for people in poverty. They're looking for people that have already experienced violence at home. Because they're an easier target, they can get them to turn much easier than somebody else who hasn't.
You know, what's very important for me after I attended one of the event that you had back in February, and I was struck. And I've been meaning to learn more about the human trafficking because I think it's happening. It's everywhere. We don't see it, we think. We don't see it. It's hidden, obviously, and the intent of the perpetrator, the criminal, is to make sure that they're not visible. They don't have a visibility.
And the criminals are very sly and professional in their trade. They're not going to be speeding down the I-95 or I-75 corridor. They're going to be driving the speed limit. They're not going to cause any attention to law enforcement. But remember, sex trafficking is three parts. At some point, they have to acquire the victim, then they have to move them. And then once they move them, they have to exploit them. So the movement is a very key strategic part for the law enforcement, because we do drug interdiction profiles and looking for it, but nobody's out there on I-95 or I-75 or 66 looking for them.
Yes.
We have over 1.5 million drug arrests a year here in the United States, but in 2012 we only had 128 prosecutions on the civil rights side of human traffickers.
Yeah.
So if we're going to devote time for drug interdiction and finding the drug dealers, why aren't we, or why can't we, do the same thing with human traffickers? Because we know the traffickers have to move their victims and they have to advertise.
They have to move their merchandise.
Yes,
right?
they do, and it's constant. East Coast is about every 3 or 4 weeks they're moving these girls and children. And if the traffickers are one step ahead of law enforcement, we can counter that and be more mindful of that.
And one thing that we've also seen on the labor side, the most calls that are coming into the Human Trafficking National Hotline with labor victims have been domestic servants. And these are people that bring the domestic servants under various visas. They hire them here, either au pairs or they're working for one of the international organizations. They don't allow them to leave the house.
Yes.
They're making them sleep on mats. They have to sleep next to their kids. They're working them 24 hours a day. They're either paying them very little or none at all, and they're very violent to them. There's been some recorded beatings that have been unbelievable. But they're being worked 24 hours a day, and they're not allowed to leave the house. So they're not being seen. So one of the poster says, look beneath the surface. And I really think that that's true. I really think that we all have to start being watchful of it. Because it is being hidden. They are expert manipulators. They know how to manipulate, and they're focusing on women and children who are not going to stand up as much.
I think is one of the components here is that for the perpetrator, the criminal, is to turn this the victim into submission, and it has to be. You take away any power that this victim may have, the connections to anybody, to everybody, the family, friends, and everything. And think about someone who doesn't speak the language, and is new, doesn't know the environment, doesn't know anybody. You're so much afraid that there's something is going to happen, even though you know that you're living in circumstances that you're in peril right there with a criminal. And so the criminal may do something really terrible to this person, besides, the fact that he's torturing, doing all these things. But, the victim doesn't realize that he's in so much danger.
And also they're telling him not to go speak to law enforcement, that the law enforcement are not going to help you. And so when they're used to law enforcement in their country, or here, the pimp says if you're going to reach out to law enforcement, when they come back out on the street, they're going to get even more violent. So they don't want to reach out. They're scared to death to reach out. And a lot of times they're threatening the family victims back home. They're monitoring the family victims so that they can say, hey, I saw your sister, she was wearing this yesterday. So they have very manipulative means of keeping these, victims quiet.
Obviously, and I'm thinking the reason why we haven't make this a priority in the United States. The numbers that you just mentioned, Greg, are the disparity in terms of where the enforcement goes and to what the federal government or the police is doing to track and to do something about what's going on with the victims of human trafficking. It is just appalling when you think about the numbers. I'm sure this is a business. There is a lot of money involved. And if people are sold and used as a merchandise, the perpetrator, the criminal, doesn't want to lose money in this. So how much money generate this?
Billions. They're saying over $60 billion now. I mean,
a year?
A year. And where's this money going? It has to be tied into the organized crime network, because rarely does law enforcement ever track this money, let alone out of the country. So traffickers, even the drug dealers, are finding they're making more money trafficking girls and children than they are selling drugs. Here in Virginia, we've had several prosecutions in 2012 and 2013 of drug dealers trafficking girls because of the money factor. Because remember, this is all about making money. And when they trick someone, let's say they're going to give them a job as a waitress in Florida, and they're going to charge them $2,000 or $3,000 for a smuggling fee. And when they get to Texas, the smuggling fee is doubled or tripled. Now they owe $9,000, and they get to Ohio or Florida, and there's no job at the waitress. And the only way, and they're forced to engage in sex, and they're told you're not leaving until you pay off your debt. So they work them and trick them and coerce them, and eventually they either run away or they pay off their bill. Because traffickers know there's a steady stream. We have 800,000 missing children in the United States on any given year, and that's a very good number because they're entered into the FBI's NCIC computer as a missing person. So where are the traffickers going to find young girls to fulfill their demand issue, which Connie's going to talk about? They're going to be looking for the runaways in the school or the children in the foster care system, because they have to get young people. So every school's at risk. My gosh, we talked to the kids in the 5th grade about drugs. through the drug,
Yes, yeah.
through the, what's the DARE program called? Drug abuse resistant education, which if you told me in the 80s when I was a state trooper that I'd be going into the 5th grade talking to kids about drugs and alcohol, I would say you're crazy. But a group of people got together and says, no, this is important, law enforcement has a role, but that was a grassroots effort. We're going to have to do this too,
Yes,
because the traffickers are targeting our children, our girls at our high schools and our middle schools, and they think they can get away with it.
And I'm sorry,
No,
I'm
no,
thinking everything that you have shared now is one, I think people may think, and I often think, why is it that we're not paying attention to this? I think it's when you see victims of violence many times is that, or someone in the situation like this person, this
Yeah.
young person can be a female or a male. They're being used for sex, so for sex, that maybe this person is there because he or she wants to do this.
Right.
If you're talking about immigrants, they're like, what are they doing here? Obviously, there are all these, I think, rationalizations as to why this is, if this is happening, why is it we're not involved doing something?
Well, I think it's interesting because people think that it is either happening to foreigners coming in, and it's not my issue. You know, it's not going to happen to my child. It's not going to happen to the next door neighbor, the kids playing on the streets, and it is. There's one girl named Angie, and she was raised in a family. She was brought up in upper middle class family. She went to a private school. Blonde hair, blue eyed, not your typical that you're going to think is going to become a
If
victim.
you're looking at profile.
Yeah,
Yes.
her
Yes.
profile. I mean, from a very well-educated school. She got mad at her parents. She decided she was going to run out of the house. So she did. She called her friends, her and her 2 girlfriends. They called the gentleman who they had just met. The gentleman came and they picked him up. And within a couple hours, the gentleman had brought them to the truck stop, and she was being sold at the truck stop. I used to work at the UN, and I had heard about, human trafficking and and certainly traveling in Asian countries, it seemed like the norm. But when I heard that young girls were being sold at truck stops, they're being forced to go up, knock on the cabs for money, they're getting raped in the back of cabs, then they have to get the money, go to the next cab, knock again, they get raped again, and this is happening to them night after night after night. So that's what got me involved. But when I saw this about Angie's story and I heard more about it, she really did nothing wrong. She got mad at her parents. She ran away from home. It's something I did, but yet because they're so savvy, they turn. And she said when she was sitting in the car, she thought, oh, maybe if I could just, get out of the car now. She said at that very moment, the man turned around and he looked at her and he said, you just better tuck and roll. In other words, you just better go along with this and then he told her, this is how much you're going to charge for a blowjob. This is how much you're going to charge for, intercourse, and you better not come back without the money. So he had played these girls off of one another. So they're using Facebook now to recruit these girls. So, and allow me to share like just 2 stories on how they're recruiting them. Now, I heard this from a man that works at the Department of Homeland Security. I haven't been able to verify him, but I really want the information to get out because people don't realize how much it can happen to them. So what they're doing on Facebook is they're looking at their Facebook profiles and they're seeing what are their interests. And if the girls are saying, be forewarned about what you put on Facebook, but if they're saying that they're mad at their parents, they're going to get back at their parents, they're going to run away from home, these are the girls that they start befriending on Facebook. And there's this whole term, it's called the boyfriending process. There's even a term for this, where they become their boyfriends, they woo them, they buy them things. And one thing Barbara Amaya had said is that these traffickers, they very perceptive, they give the girls what they perceive they need. So if they need money, if they need attention, if they need love, these girls are coming, from very low self-esteems. So they're using Facebook pages to be able to find out what their interests are. But what this gentleman from the Department of Homeland Security told me is that one of the girls, she's put down that she was interested in this scholarship. So she got a phone call from a man saying that he was interested in talking to her more about the scholarship. Wow. She said, well, I'm not going to talk to you not unless my parents are home. My parents are going to be home at 5 o'clock. And he came over at 4 o'clock. So here she's thinking she didn't really do anything wrong, and yet she's turned.
She provided information that this person could use.
And then he told me one other story, and I'd love to get this corroborated, but this is, he's in this business. So, but it really made me stop and think too. they go into the bars, and the trafficker will go into the bar, introduce himself to a group of women and say, which one of you wants to buy me a drink? And the one that jumps for it and that will go for it and will buy him the drink is the one that needs the most attention and is the one that he can turn. So they're very savvy now. So it's not just happening to foreign victims that are coming in, it's happening to our girls that are getting tricked into this.
Which is one of the reasons why we need to talk to these girls in school.
Yes.
There are many girls in high school that are approached by sex traffickers and they say no, but they never call law enforcement. They never tell the school official. And if we knew, law enforcement, that this person at this phone number has been soliciting or asking for naked pictures or sending naked pictures, a police department could open an investigation on them, but the calls aren't coming. So if we do have a program like DARE where we talk to the kids. Now the traffickers don't want community groups talking to the schools. They don't want a drug-like program about sex trafficking in the schools because that's going to take away their business. So it's a whole opportunity out here to get these guys. The number one complaint I see from the police chiefs, we don't get any calls from the community.
Oh.
We have no cases.
So there is no problem.
And so if the calls aren't coming in, but the calls are coming. Now these posters that you have the hotline, the national hotline. The community's coming aware of this. Your show is going to be opening a lot of eyes, and people are going to start seeing things at nail salons or acupuncture centers or massage parlors. Now these massage parlors are scattered all around Montgomery County and Virginia, D.C., where women go in and they never come out, and they're in there for weeks at a time, and vans are pull up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Are red flags, especially if you work next to one and you see a lot of strange things going on. Now that's why law enforcement needs to work with the community, because if the building inspector or the plumbing inspector goes in and writes a ticket for having 10 mattresses in the kitchen and never calls law enforcement and never gets to the FBI, Homeland Security, they're not going to realize there's a possible sex trafficking ring going, because the inspector is writing him a ticket for 10 mattresses in the kitchen. That shows people aren't leaving. That's showing the control. And that's why all groups in the county and the city, all government officials need to be trained on human trafficking, not just law enforcement.
So that brings me to the question is, what should we as the public should be looking for? What are the tips? What are how can we detect them? Obviously, you mentioned some of those that, if you see, for someone, for example, who work in the medical profession, what kind of clues you look for? And obviously we need to ask questions, and we pay attention to our surroundings. It can be in our neighborhood, can be in the schools, can be, here in Montgomery College, we have tons of students. We have 60,000 students a year. And they have families, they live in neighborhoods, but it's how we're going to help these victims. And we don't know. Could be somebody down the street that we don't know about. And awareness, what you said, education and awareness. We should start working with the schools, the kids. We should get to every single group there is, the churches. Everybody should be talking about this.
Absolutely.
Connie's going to mention the law, but just before the law passed in 2000, and this is the first good law since 1865, Senator Wellstone said law enforcement, through either complacency or inadequate laws, has made human trafficking a low-risk business venture for these folks. And he's right. And what he did, he passed this Trafficking Victims Protection Act in 2000. But law enforcement officers aren't being trained about this. There's no course at most police academies in Virginia and Maryland on what the patrolman or the deputy or the state trooper should be doing. So we have to train the law enforcement. Then we have to train the community, the inspectors, the permit issuers. Then the community groups have to be trained. So there's a lot of things, but at the end of the day, we need dedicated law enforcement officers. We need not just a civil rights squad, the FBI. We need human trafficking units at all police departments, all medium and large departments. So the detectives are part of a task force. The chief of police knows about it. He talks about it at community meetings. The crime prevention officer, when he goes to the schools and churches, he can talk to the people what's going on in their community with human trafficking. We need to talk about this, and one way to do it is educating the law enforcement, because there's not a lot of arrests. If this is a 30, 40, or $50 billion industry, how come we only had 128 cases of human trafficking by the Civil Rights Squad in 2012? That's only 4 years ago, or 2 years ago.
And you had mentioned what should people
Yes.
be? Yeah, what should they be looking
Where-
for?
For example, let me ask you something.
Sure.
Is the number to call for people to ask for help or for information? Any links that we can mention that we can include, when this gets aired, we can include these links for the public, so when they watch the program, it's going to be there and they can see where they can call for help.
Yeah.
I know the two of you are very much involved, and with your organization.
Sure.
When you have it, I know you do trainings, and I'm sure you will go whenever you're called. And this is a great thing, because awareness and also community outreach. How can we reach out and work together? Problems like this don't get addressed unless like you said, Greg, is grassroots, and we all had to get involved in this because it affects us all.
Okay, and so we've given you, and you're going to post on your website, 3 different websites and links so that people can see what are the red flags, what are the signs of human trafficking.
Yes.
But basically, since human trafficking involves slavery, it's work, and it involves control. So these are kind of some of the red flags to look for. Now, it was very interesting at Stop Modern Slavery, a gentleman who is an advocate in the hotel industry. He lives on the streets at K and 11th Northwest in DC, and that's right where the prostitution track is in K and 11th. And he wrote to us, and another gentleman in our organization also works there. They saw like 5 prostitutes that night out on the streets. And so they were emailing back and forth, and both of them said that they had called their local police department. So if you ever see any prostitution, which is really human trafficking, if you see this going on in the streets, please do call either 911 or call the human trafficking. So this is one of the signs, just, plain simple. Now, labor trafficking, I mean, if you see a boy being checked into a hotel, there's no luggage. They're moving these people very quickly all up and down the East Coast. They won't have any possessions with them. I know another attorney that I worked with at work, he said, oh, I always see them standing outside on this street corner. I see them being picked up and dropped off, and all they have is a trash bag with them. So they don't have any possessions with them. They're very scared. They're going to show signs of malnourished because they're not being taken care of. They're going to show physical injuries. But how you can distinguish them between like a woman who's just getting, like a battered woman, is that it involves around her job. So you can ask them questions like, what do you do? Are you allowed out of the house? Anytime that you can come in contact with them, how are they treating you? Any of these. If they're foreign nationals, if they don't speak English, if you can find out about their passports, a lot of times they'll take their passports and they'll confiscate them. But really, it's just when they don't want to reach out into the community. You can tell by their demeanor that something's up, like your instincts should go up. And please do call the trafficking hotline, even if you think, you don't know. The young girl next door doesn't appear to be going to school every day.
Right.
She's doing odd jobs. She's outside. We heard of somebody making them wash the car late at night. It was cold out. She's not leaving the house. She doesn't, reach out and talk to you. As she sees you, she's really withdrawn. So these are some of the signs that they can look out for.
One of the posters, all the posters have this information, and this is the hotline that the public can call. It is the 1-888-3737-888. So we're going to include this information when this interview is ready for release, so you can have this information ready for you. So anything else you would like to add? We're almost running out of time, so please.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some other areas that I wanted to let people know how they can get involved. So one thing is on prevention. We have to prevent this crime. And so there are various organizations, and what I wanted to mention is the Latin American Youth Center, Casa de Maryland, Fair Girls, FAIR, Fair Girls, Covenant House, and Catholic Charities. These are some organizations that work with at-risk youth. So if anybody wants to volunteer for these organizations, volunteer their time. There's also other organizations if they want to find out more, what resources are available. Certainly DC Stop Modern Slavery, my organization. Polaris Project, they're the organization that mans the hotline. Again, Fair Girls, Shared Hope International, the Samaritan Women, Seraphim Global, Courtney's House, which is a rescue center, and Amara Legal Center. They provide free legal services to these victims. And just one last thing, DC Stop Modern Slavery, we have our annual Walk Fest that's coming up, and it's going to be on October 4th. So people can get involved, come out. All the organizations are going to be there. We raise money. All the money goes for trafficking victims.
Very good. And we can provide your phone numbers and your information, how people can get in touch with you, and the link to our websites?
Sure, we'll give you various places. I like people to visit the FBI website, the Homeland Security website, and the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They'll answer your questions. They're not a law enforcement group, but we'll have all the links, and we look forward to receiving phone calls.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining me. It's been a pleasure. We're out of time. This has been Gloria Bonilla with Montgomery College, Mi Escuela es Su Escuela. Until next time, thank you.